Dynasty wide receiver ranking conflicts. We've got Dynasty trading to go over, as well as the Football Guys Shark Pool quotes from the week. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara, and welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. So we've got Matthew Stafford being traded as the big news that has ripples for redraft coming up in 2021. And it really kicks off an interesting offseason for the quarterback marketplace. Obviously, it brings into focus on what the possible price tag, if there even is one, it's limitless. Let's just keep rolling that money off, keep hitting people with quarters in the face until they reach $5 trillion billion, because that's probably what's going to take if Houston is silly willy enough to deal a top 5, top 6 quarterback in his mid-20s. But Matthew Stafford, my first reaction, and we'll just go a couple bullet points here, Jordan, but is Matthew Stafford has had not a defense around him for much of his time, not a run game much around him. I think this is his absolute best chance and pretty much the best situation he could have landed in to potentially get a Super Bowl ring. He stays in the NFC, which is a lot less competitive probably to get to the Super Bowl next year than the loaded AFC. And you've got a defense ready. You've got Cam Akers at 22 years old, primed and ready. You've got the weapons still around him. For Matthew Stafford, I can't wait to watch him in potentially a very, very good and supportive situation.
Yeah, as good as it's been for him in his entire career. So I'm pretty excited about it. I was looking at at some of his numbers, right, and what his stat profile was last year for Detroit compared to a lot of the stuff that the Rams were doing. They ran a ton of play action. They were 5th in the league in play action, and Detroit was only 19th. So that's a pretty big bump. And Stafford was there's a big difference between him on play action, him versus not. So that should really help him in terms of some of the efficiency stuff. What's interesting, if you look at some of the production stats for quarterbacks in terms of expected points added and CPOE, completion percentage over expectation, Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff were literally like the same quarterback. But of course that's without McVay, right? So that's basically what, that's Stafford with whatever was going on the last 4 years compared to Goff with McVay, right? So I think that it's going to open up a whole level of ceiling there for Stafford and for the team as a whole. I actually think, perversely, I think it's actually good for both quarterbacks, because at least with Goff, we had all these questions about what his situation was. I think this answers it by and large over the next couple of years. So, and then see what happens. I mean, I don't think they should take a quarterback. They have plenty of other needs. Quarterback's not really, right? It doesn't really seem to be front of mind in terms of the most important thing for right now, which is just putting some pieces in place, and maybe they can rehabilitate Goff's value. So I think by and large it's good for both quarterbacks, and I think it's perceived as bad for Goff, which should create some value opportunities if you want to sort of shore up quarterback 2, quarterback 3 in Superflex.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go, is that Goff in Superflex is pretty interesting considering he has a couple top 12 seasons, one of them grazing into the top 6. Now, it hasn't been in the last 2 seasons, so that out of sight, out of mind, we haven't really seen it in a while factor. But, I mean, because if you think about it, Carson Wentz has had higher impact more recently than Jared Goff, and look at their 2 situations. I mean, Goff, as you mentioned, clear-cut week 1 starter, and, even if they draft someone, let's say they go Trey Lance or someone at, in the top 10, it still could be Jared Goff's job for the entire season. They transition relatively slowly, and Goff can hold them off potentially for a span of time. So you have a guy with a clarified start, to begin the season. And he's someone that I would guess in startup drafts is going to largely fall down the board this offseason heading into the NFL draft. And especially if they draft someone in the top 10, Goff is going to go even lower, and probably lower than the guy that they draft. So I think that's a very interesting dynamic for a guy that we always say go back to the well, especially as the price falls on guys that have proven for multiple seasons that they've done it, meaning a top 12 season, and especially if they've gone beyond that like Goff has. So Superflex, these distressed assets, and we see guys like Tannehill fall to backup, or now Jameis Winston falls to backup, and guys that end up falling through the cracks that have produced before, and that's when they become super interesting. And the main reason is cost, being key, and they fall through the floor, acquisition price wise.
Yeah, what do you think on odds that Jameis Winston starts in 2021?
Well, if you take the Adam Schefter, what is it? The over under of is it 18?
Yeah,
new fresh week 1 starters that weren't at the current team. I mean, 18. If Jameis Winston's not one of the 18, I mean, that's probably relatively damning, right? So again, I'm a Winston supporter and fan, and the fact that he's going to go for probably a fraction of some of the other free agents out there in terms of cost. I mean, he's probably going to go for less cost than some of the taking out Trevor Lawrence, what they get paid, the non-Trevor Lawrence rookies in round 1 in terms of their scaling of salary. So that's the interesting part for me, because and fantasy wise, as long as he's a starter, he's officially fantasy interesting because you're typically not penalized heavily for fumbles and interceptions, especially in almost all formats. So that means he can be a Ryan Fitzpatrick box score stuffer, with his underrated and most of the time clunky looking mobility. But again, we don't care. You get yards and touchdowns as your points, not beauty pageant points. So yeah, I mean, he's officially interesting to me, and I would probably put it at least 40% and maybe venturing 50% plus that Winston is on a team that even if they drafted a quarterback, that Winston is their week 1 plan, in late April.
Yeah, I think I'd even take higher than that. Just in terms of the numbers, I think you're going to, especially if you see another retirement or two, I just think the numbers are going to almost necessitate it. So it'll be interesting. I've tried to stack away a couple shares, but yeah, this is definitely a time where there's going to be a lot of quarterback movement. I mean, just before we started recording, there was news that maybe Derek Carr is going to be on the move, right? Which could actually be pretty interesting in terms of what he could offer, maybe a little bit different of a scheme. So I think there is going to be more movement, and I think that the main thing is going to be where Watson, and I mean, heck, with how much movement that is sort of being rumored about, you don't even know if maybe Dak is part of that movement too. Right. So not under contract for 2021. So we'll see there what happens with all those moving pieces, but it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah. And for Derek Carr, one thing that I haven't mentioned probably in at least a few episodes, and this time of year, we could probably say it almost every episode leading up to free agency, especially because what I like to do, and others may have a different process, is when you look at a free agent, or you mentioned Derek Carr, and that's what kind of sprung me into this, is that when you think of they're in this current setting, their incumbent team, and then I think of it as sort of the range of outcomes or maybe average outcome of the remaining 31 teams. Obviously, it's not actually 31, but you have a large subset of possibilities for a free agent or if they're going to be traded, obviously, because at quarterback, there's not a lot of stable, oh yeah, that's their plan, lock it in week 1, or their 2021 plan is this. So you don't have that many. So for Derek Carr, I look at, what he has with the Raiders and post Amari Cooper. I mean, he's had Darren Waller as a tight end, as a wide receiver 1, and Brian Edwards really didn't get going in his rookie year. Henry Ruggs had a couple of moments, and that's about it. Nelson Aguilar was a revelation as a reclamation project, and they really didn't use Josh Jacobs in the passing game. So I think if Derek Carr goes somewhere else, I mean, I think that's good news. I think in terms of weapons he's likely to have, it's likely better than what he has there, especially at wide receiver and the output he had, or the stability of having someone a lot more set in stone as this is your alpha right here. Here you go, Mr. Carr. I think that's more likely. So I would actually be pretty interested by that of sort of extending the leash, where the Raiders, I think we were going to go into this year thinking, how much allegiance does he have and how much of a hot seat does he have if he's traded and acquired and valued by somebody else like a Jared Goff, right? I mean, you can think of that as a salary dump, but they they got him, and that actually helps them, Detroit, quite a bit in terms of having someone in the room and not needing to address the position outside of him if they don't want. So for Carr, I think that would actually be good news to possibly extend his window from 2021 to possibly a couple more years beyond that.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting splits with him, like off non-play action from the pocket, best in the NFL last year, which is crazy to think about in terms of yards per attempt. But some of the splits on him are weird, right? He's significantly worse on non-play action. I think it's a lot of how they structure that, but there's room there, right? That's a tough skill, right? That's something that's tough to be really good at. So he's really good at that. And if you could go somewhere and optimize him other places, that's interesting. I mean, Indianapolis would be I think, a sneaky, really good landing spot. But yeah, it's a lot of movement. I think it's going to be an interesting, for what is normally a dead period between the Super Bowl or the championship games and the Super Bowl. The trades have gotten me through, especially with the with the grieving process of the Bills losing. So
yeah, what hiatus waiting for the Super Bowl, right? I mean, never a dull moment in Dynasty, and that's why we're here, recording yet another show. We're on about episode 40 or so. I'd have to look at the total tally here, but yeah, and we're going to continue. We talked about running back last week. We picked a player or two to discuss where we differ in rankings. So we're going to continue that with wide receivers in this episode. And we're going to start with a player near and dear to both of our hearts in a relative spectrum. And we've talked about quite a bit on this show or not over the last span of time is Jarvis Landry. So we have a big discrepancy, about 30 positional spots between us. I have to imagine that's probably the biggest spread of any player, just because, other positions, there's less of a spread opportunity. But you are in the pro Landry camp. I would mention, like, the general marketplace would be in somewhere in the wide receiver 40s. Is where you would typically find him if you were just, hey, we found some dynasty rankings. Where's Jarvis Landry in early February? Probably somewhere in the 40s. You are at 24. I have him drifting past the 50, past wide receiver 50. So I'm behind. You're ahead. So give us the pro Jarvis Landry pitch here inside your top 30.
I think he's been outstanding, really, for most of his career in terms of being high-end fantasy value, right? Has it been tight? Has it been wide receiver 1? No, but it's been a lot of top 15s. This past year looks like a down year until you sort of back up a little bit and say, hey, it was low volume, right? And it wasn't low volume in a sense of he wasn't drawing targets. It was low volume in the sense of they just didn't throw it that much. And so when you go and you actually look at some of the splits, he's still top 20 in terms of yards per route run, which is really the metric that I look at and say, hey, was this guy sort of falling off, or is something else going on? And for me, he still rocks out, right, in terms of those things. So I think what happened in 2020 is just a reduction in volume and some negative touchdown variance. But besides, it's interesting because that range of the position is, you can have a big swing on how you rank players from 20 to 50 based on just how you see the world or what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're trying to take huge upside swings, you can do that repeatedly, right? And have Landry really low. Or if you just want to take like a double, right? And I'll take the next couple of years, knowing that I'm going to kind of be ahead if I get a couple of hits there on the odds of that part of the position, right? Then I'm ahead. So that's really how I think it's a philosophical for Jarvis Landry. I don't think 2020 was a decline. I think it was just a reduction in volume, and I don't think it's an erosion of skill. And it's a lot of how I see the world as I'm looking for at that particular part of the wide receiver tier. I'm looking for a wide receiver that has stability in terms of what I think a floor expectation is for the next couple of years. So he sort of fits that my mind's eye in that way. Yeah,
I think part of it is, I would say this is that the two different prisms I would say are team direction. So Landry, how does he fit if you're generally not a contender going into this year, or if it's an orphan situation? I think that clarifies the situation. I would also say if it's a stock depth roster, I am less interested in Landry than, I'm in some where you start at least 4 and some leagues where I'm starting 5 or 6 wide receivers a week. And that changes the prism of what are you looking for and that depth on the back end. And if you can plug Landry in as your wide receiver 5, that has some good punch and value to it for sure. But in a typical, let's say it's 25-man roster type league, you're starting 2 or 3 mandatory wide receivers. Maybe you can flex another one that, he really does lose a lot of tiebreakers for me. I didn't, until I was putting this together and until I updated for the off season and pushing ahead to 2021, 2021 and beyond for dynasty valuations and rankings, it kind of struck me because you rewind the tape a couple years and he looks different than he looks today. I didn't believe this was actually in year 7. This was his lowest adjusted points per game finish since his rookie year, where he was wide receiver 40 or so. And for me, the comps, when you typically see a guy at this point, later 20s, where they fall off, and what I mean by fall off, it's like you fall out of the top, you're typically in the top 25 or 30, and you fall outside that zone. That's like a running back kind of losing their edge a little bit, and typically it does not return. Like his comparable prospects and veterans at this standpoint are not overly kind to him at this point. And the problem with Landry is his peak season and his real high impact was years and years ago, meaning that it's not coming back. So the market value is kind of gone at this point. So we're really discussing and navigating his roster value. And he's not really considered that boom guy anyway. And I would actually say that because talking to a little bit in terms of the Browns folks that we know, that he could be someone that could be a roster casualty, a contract casualty this offseason. I actually think changing teams would actually boost his stock for me. I typically don't say that. And historically, that's not a good sign for wide receivers that year after you change teams. And for a guy that's 28, 29 years old, you don't have wiggle room of, oh yeah, we'll just take a mulligan season and, we'll regroup at age 30. Like, no, pretty much at that point, you're going to fall through the floor. So with Landry, if you were to change teams, I actually think that's good news because you mentioned the low volume. Odell Beckham being there, they've got a drove of tight ends. It's a run-centric attack, and I think Baker Mayfield takes a step back in how he produced on his said volume next year. So if he were to stay, I'd be more concerned than if he leaves, because if he leaves, I think he could be more of a higher volume wide receiver 2, or maybe even, as he was with Miami, a de facto wide receiver 1. So that's going to be something to watch with free agency. Is he someone that maybe moves on because of their cap situation, kind of restructuring things in Cleveland? So I'm actually looking forward to that, but otherwise it's going to have a hard time because the guys I have over him, a lot of them are either number ones or projected number ones for their depth chart, or number twos that I think are intriguing enough or on high leverage enough passing games where there's more upside than Jarvis Landry. And or I would mention that I also have 7 incoming rookies ahead of him. So that's going to also, if some people don't have rookies in there, then you could take those out and he's closer, to the mid 40s. Jarvis Landry is for me.
Yeah, and I don't have rookies in there either. So so that might contribute a little bit to it. But I would say, like, when you look at his stats, I would caution people if they're thinking that this is a fall off in terms of play. I mean, just look at some of the guys that have that match up with him and just think of what the difference in their value is. Cooper Kupp, Brandon Ayuk, Adam Thielen, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore all have the exact same target share. 24%, right? So when you look at that, that's actually pretty good, right? And when you look at his yards per target, third best of his career. Last year was his second best, right? So there isn't a lot there. Again, the yards per route runs top 20 in the league, right? There isn't a lot there to suggest that he's falling off. It's almost entirely situation. And so and again, I don't think the ceiling was that far away. He was a top 12 wide receiver last year, right? So, and he had hip surgery in the off season, right? And sort of rebounds basically without an off season to prepare, rebounds to the same or if not better efficiency, depending on how you want to measure it. So, all of that, I hope he lands someplace else, right? I hope he lands because. You could name a bunch of different offenses that are going to throw the ball more. If he takes a 24% market share somewhere that's throwing the ball 100 more times, you're right back into a top 15 type seasonal finish. So that's really it for me. I think it's entirely situation. I haven't seen a fall off in the player. And so that's why I'll stick with that profile.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a little less clarified on the let's project him to change teams because he is under contract, and it would take a two-step process of obviously landing somewhere else, but also being released from the Browns or potentially a trade or something like that. So it does take a two-step process as opposed to some of these other wide receivers who are unrestricted and we're already kind of projecting ahead to they probably will, like Juju Smith-Schuster and a few others, that they will be going somewhere else, in high likelihood. So we do have a two-step process. And again, I do think Landry would be better served and he would move up for me if he does go somewhere else a little more pass friendly and a little more Jarvis Landry friendly. All right. So let's hit one more here, and that's Brandon Ayuk. So we're flipping the script on this one because Jordan sits at wide receiver 21. I have him just a shade inside my top 10 Dynasty wide receivers. So hit me hard, Jordan, with the I do not like Brandon Ayuk as much as you approach an argument here, good sir.
Oh, you made me open last time. I want to hear yours.
Oh, you got to defend the high end. Is that the way we're going to do this? What we'll do is every single player in this we'll put on a pedestal. So the higher person goes first. Boom, here it is. And then the other person is going to take a baseball bat and just whack part of it off. Half of it's going to break, and then the rest of it's just going to dribble onto the floor. All right. So Brandon Ayuk. I am, and I was, and still am, and I was not expecting as good of a rookie year as he was able to produce through quarterback questions. And yes, he benefited a little bit. You didn't have George Kittle in there. Deebo Samuel also missed time. By the way, I'm one of those that said Brandon Ayuk greater than Deebo Samuel, and that was the moment Brandon Ayuk was drafted. I said, well, there's your wide receiver one of this team. So Deebo Samuel being out to me wasn't going to be a critical piece. And I think one of the bigger perks situationally is the fact that they kind of have their two wide receivers locked in. I'd be surprised if they splash the pot, but there's already talk, that they're going to be in and interested in some sort of quarterback upgrade. And I know we're both kind of looking forward to that because Jimmy Garoppolo is the quarterback we love to hate in that he's been overvalued, by dynasty circles, by NFL standards. And, it's always about the throws that he thinks he can make and ultimately tries to make and is not successful with said throws. So that's really an unlocking element of this offense, I think, is going to be quarterback play. They can pretty much get out of Garoppolo. But with Brandon Ayuk, I mean, I was so encouraged. I mean, with if you look at top 24 guys, and he was sturdily above that in year one on a per game basis, that you look at round one wide receivers, the guys that turn into future wide receiver ones is a pretty robust in terms of the density of the hits list. You've got AJ Green, Mike Evans, Percy Harvin, who knows how many more he would have had and what trajectory and how we think of him beyond an injury. And then Brandon Cooks, who is a guy that's perennially underrated, and you're not going to find two bigger fans of him throughout his career than the two of us on this show. Now the misses, in terms of looking at round one guys that had a wide receiver 2 level rookie season, the misses were Charles Rogers, who injury was the key reason there. Michael Clayton was a complete dud after year one. So does that fit Brandon Ayuk? Well, a complete dud after year one, after having some success, is really tough to predict. Then you have Kelvin Benjamin, quasi tight end, and the guy frankly couldn't move. And then finally you had Peter Warrick, who he still had a peak year beyond year one at wide receiver 15, which was better than his year one finish, despite being an overall disappointment. So looking at this overall list, very promising. And again, we're talking about someone that already has the pedigree, already has the promising start. And there was a cross section. And remember, this was like every 2 weeks it would change. And Justin Jefferson's the greatest. And then it was CD. Actually, I think it started with CD Lamb, and it just keeps passing around between these rookies. But there's a cross section of 4 to 6 weeks where look at what Brandon Ayuk is doing. And this isn't like, oh yeah, this is a nice little best ball story. No, you plug and played him and he was putting up rock solid with a high ceiling projection on a weekly basis. And so he was an actual impact year one. And I have no quibbles about having him in the top 10 to 12 because, again, you're looking at age, insulation, and the fact that even if it's not this year, the fact that there already kind of murmurs that they're trying about quarterback, if he gets a quarterback upgrade, I mean, wheels up completely on this situation. So I do think it's loaded in the top 10, 15, maybe even 20 of dynasty wide receivers. It's a great it's a great offseason. And we've talked before about the mid rounds of dynasty startups and all this. But Brandon Ayuk is one of the few guys that isn't 27, 28, 29 years old that's on this trajectory, has the pedigree, in my opinion, locked in as the wide receiver one for that team and looks the part. And you're saying he could get an upgrade at quarterback as soon as this offseason. Then I think all signs point to on the uptick. And if he improves on what he did or just does what he did for that middle portion of the season for most of next season, he's going to be here, if not higher, by basically everyone by October, November.
Yeah, no, I get the upside argument. It's really, I think one thing you said is precise, which is it's really a good top 20, right? It's tough to pick out of some of these guys. And I'll say, like, I have Juju Smith-Schuster ahead of him, and like I'll wake up on different days and I don't know how I feel about that. Like I just can't. And honestly, like as the more I'm sort of sitting here thinking about it, I was like, I know a lot less about Juju than I do about Brandon Ayuk right now in terms of it's the way directions are heading. So I mean that's one that I could absolutely see above him. I just think in terms of I have seen a little bit more out of the guys ahead of him, and that's basically it. For me, DJ Moore's ahead of him. Allen Robinson's ahead of him. And then, I'd be interested to see, I didn't check sort of where you are on, who's not ahead of him. That's between me, but everyone ahead of him has a little bit more density with the exception of CD Lamb, which I'm going to have to flip flop. I didn't realize that I had done that. So I think I'm going to put Ayuk ahead of CD Lamb. But again, I don't know how I could go either way on Juju, right? So again, it's really tough because you could have him at 20 or you could have him at 8, and it's not that big of a difference. And this is a good example of
tiers.
Yeah. That rankings aren't linear. They shouldn't be, they're not smooth, right? That there's really, and again, I think it really this year more than any other year that I can remember, you have different groups, right? You have young sort of up and coming, not fully established, but good tracks. You've got sort of the mid-tier guys, right? And that's more the DJ Moore, the Cooper types, right? That are sort of, we sort of know what they are, almost in like that Brandon Cooks type mold of the position from for years. That's where he sort of resided. And then you have some of the guys that are a little bit later in their 20s, and sort of how do you balance that, right? That's it for me. I think generally speaking, I am a little bit late to the party on the young, like, wide receivers, right? And that might even just be the anti this guy's the new wide receiver one thing that happened every week in season, right? That might just be my natural reaction to that. But I will say at wide receiver and quarterback, I am much more of a, hey, I want to date them before I marry them, right? I want to sort of get to know them more. And I think that you can get the costliest mistakes is when you go too early at those two positions. So, I know more about DJ Moore. Does Brandon Ayuk have a higher upside? Does he have a wider range of outcomes? Yes, but I know a lot more about DJ Moore, and I feel more comfortable there. That's kind of what the decisions that are going on in this, with the caveat that I probably should have him ahead of CeeDee Lamb and Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, I just looked. I have 18 wide receivers, and they're split in tier 1 and tier 2. So, I mean, I can't recall that ever being the case. I mean, right. Probably 24 months ago, I could have had probably 4 tiers in the top 20 or so. And so that just speaks to, and we've said this before, I mean, I don't think I've ever had this take that this is the off season. If you leave the first 2 or even 3 rounds of your startup draft without a wide receiver, you're just fine. Because again, you're in my world, you're still going to be operating with probably someone in your top 2 tiers still there, and for sure top 3 tiers, still available to be able to build around with a couple guys from the mid rounds at minimum. So it really is a glorious era. Now, in a couple of years, we're going to have complete age erosion from, at least market value wise, from probably half of the top 12 to 15 that you commonly have up there, just because of age. By the time you get to, I'm actually surprised some of these 28-year-olds are as insulated as they are for the present. But by the time they get to 29 and especially 30, I mean, unless they're on a Julio Jones top 3, top 5 season they're coming off of, it's very hard to stay insulated by that point. So just keep that in mind. And again, who you're building your team for, yourself and your lineup, or you're worried about what the market's going to think and how liquid you're going to be in 12 months after drafting them. Two different discussions there in terms of an approach on who to select in that range. Do want to remind you to subscribe, rate, and review Football Guys on all your podcasting platforms. You can sign up for the Football Guys daily email update delivered from Joe Bryant, your daily guide to all your news and instant analysis at footballguys.com/free. And do want to announce we've got Dynasty rankings as mentioned, updated on the site, but also 2021 redraft rankings are being updated. So you can check out, we're going to have a bunch of them completed by the time the Super Bowl is complete, rolling out next week, which is the official start for many people of the offseason for the NFL. Dynasty offseason already started a few weeks ago for offseason trading and all of that, startup drafts beginning. But again, those forward 2021 best ball and redraft and Dynasty rankings are ready to go, and they're going to be in full force by the end of the Super Bowl weekend and kicking off next week. So just keep that in mind over there at Football Guys. Let's talk about some strategy, team building, and player value through the vehicle of Dynasty trading for the final section of this week's show. And kick it off. You mentioned in passing Amari Cooper, but let's start with one of his trades, because this is a classic. You can really pare down what type of owner you are, because Amari Cooper and FFPC has some sharp cut downs coming, and that's in about another month or so. But you see a lot of positioning. I found a lot of FFPC trades in the Football Guys Shark Pool thread for completed Dynasty trades this past week, and I think you're going to keep seeing them. This one was Amari Cooper and 209 for Michael Pittman and a 2022 first, Jordan. Try to keep your cringe in check.
Break the keyboard hitting accept, because it might be taken away too quickly. You don't want to. You need to beat that withdrawal of the trade button. So,
and why is this bad process?
Because the more research I've done, I tend to think that that the Dynasty market is miscalibrated, and what I mean by that is Dynasty GMs are constantly searching for this elite, multiple, high-end production. And that would be sort of the Pittman side of this trade, at the expense of winning, which is the Amari Cooper side of the trade. And that's really the distinction, right? I think the market miscalibrates pretty significantly with guys that have not hit yet, and they think that there's a lot more upside there than taking. I just analogize it to playing golf, right? I mean, or baseball, right? Like, would you rather hit a bunch of doubles or go, or hit a home run every 10th at bat, right? I mean, or would you rather, hit driver all over the place and hit it OB and under a tree and into a pond and all this other stuff? Or would you rather just take your 3-wood and hit it in the middle of the fairway and go up there and try and knock it on the green, right? I mean, I'm much more of the, hey, let's put a lot of balls in play and go from there, than I am trying to take these big, massive, huge swings that result in negative EV all over the place. So that's really the argument for Cooper over Pittman.
You are the golfer of the two of us, but I don't know if I've ever shared this story. So, I mean, I had a friend who actually went on to play college golf, and now actually, I think is a assistant pro or teacher or something like that at a course, and still plays what is it, two-man tournaments, or there's alternate shot and there's all this other stuff. But anyway, he was the guy I played with for 2 or 3 years when I was growing up, and really the only time I played golf. And what was hilarious is, so he was the high variance guy. He obviously had way better skills than me, and obviously what he went to go on to do in the sport of golf, was way different than me just ignoring it and getting rid of my clubs. But my old clubs that I got at a yard sale. But it was hilarious how he approached it. Like, he was approaching it from the, let's try to put it together, and he might make a birdie this hole. He was good enough to make birdies. And I played that classic, slow, I knew I was a bogey golfer, and I'm probably going to, almost every round I shot 84 to 95, but I didn't really have that. Like, I didn't shoot a 10 on like any holes. Like
Right.
he would get frustrated, like shooting into the water or the woods, like 2 or 3 times off the tee in a row. Now, did he count it? I don't know what he scored, but I would know, okay, you drive it down the middle. Okay, now I'm probably going to get close to the green, but not on the green. But then I'm going to pitch it on, then I'm going to 2-putt, and there's my bogey. Like, I was just a classic bogey golfer. And it's reminded of exactly what you just said, which is like, you just keep putting yourself into position. And I did make some pars. I had a birdie, 3 times in my life or whatever. Just, it's not very often. But why? Because I'm just trying to play percentages, is because I know, I mean, if I go into the sand, I was toast. Like, I might shoot a 9 just because I went into the sand and I don't know what I'm doing in there. I might as well, grab the sunscreen and and sunglasses, because I'm on the beach. Like, this is not going to go well. So anyway, but I approached it that way, and I think a couple rounds I actually beat him in my life, just because he was high variance and he would have those down days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think shooting for Michael Pittman and assuming he's going to have a fraction of the career left for Amari Cooper is pretty folly and misguided. That, I mean, he's probably closer to, I mean, the Colts could be in the market for a wide receiver, for goodness sake. And so how do you feel? I mean, Cooper is insulated, and he was the wide receiver 1 when Dak Prescott was healthy last year. So, I mean, don't miss, don't throw that away, is what I would say. And just any upside wide receiver that did a little something, for a cross section of the year. And it's not like Pittman has elite pedigree and, a run first offense, maybe not. I mean, there's more variables there than Amari Cooper locked in with probably Dak Prescott and, questionable defense, high volume. I mean, a lot of positives there. So, all right, let's go to another one. And I thought this was, we haven't talked about Kareem Hunt much. And I think it's interesting that he's locked in at least for another year with Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb might be a free agent after this coming year, but Kareem Hunt and 306 for Taysom Hill, Ty Johnson, pretty much throw-ins and a 1 quarterback. Maybe we'll see with Taysom Hill, but 204 and 206 are the key pieces there in return for Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, it's interesting. If this was Superflex, I might think about the Taysom Hill aspect of this a little bit differently. But and 1 quarterback, I don't know. What do you think is the most likely thing to really tilt your league? Kareem Hunt or a couple of mid seconds? And when you're getting 306 in there as well, it's not really a true mid-second. It's a bump up and around. You're probably clearing a tier. I don't know. I would probably take Kareem Hunt here, just because, again, I think he has a decent shot at in the event that Nick Chubb is hurt. I think a healthy Kareem Hunt could be pretty effective. I'm not sure what we saw this year was a healthy Kareem Hunt. So that's kind of where I'm at. I don't love the construction of this trade generally, but I would take the Hunt side.
Okay. I think it's pretty close. I think the most interesting part for me would be, what can 204 and 206 do for you? I'm pretty confident that if you combine those picks, you're getting into round 1. Now, how high? I mean, could you get to, depending on how the board shakes for somebody, could you get to 9? Something like that. Maybe even get a future third back, something like that. So 9 gets you somewhere. And I don't think, if it's not super flex, I don't think 204, 206 gets you in the zone of maybe getting a first round wide receiver off the NFL draft board, which would really interest me from an insulation standpoint. The fact that Hunt is sort of in a committee, and could he be the Browns starter in 2022 and Chubb is gone? Maybe, but basically you're buying a high end, maybe the highest end, backup that you can actually flex and, utilize in your lineup, and he'll have some good games and all of that. But Chubb is the guy in terms of like, how does this offense run? So that's the part that kind of irks me. Obviously, I think Kareem Hunt maybe can squeeze a first, and these 2 seconds are kind of a proxy for that. So I think it's pretty close. If you're good at running back, I think this is a way to get more flexibility, because if Hunt's not returning a first, you kind of got 2 mid seconds, and now you have the flexibility with your other picks to move around the board a lot more freely. And now you might be able to cook with gas and actually get your legitimate target player. Is that again a first round wide receiver in the late first of your draft? Is that maybe moving up and getting someone like Kyle Pitts? If you have a late first and now you have these picks, you have a lot of flexibility to get to mid first. So I kind of like the flexibility there that Kareem Hunt doesn't give you at this point. All right, let's go to, I thought this was an interesting one in FFPC. We've got DeAndre Swift and 108 for George Kittle and 105. So Kittle largely a lost season for him with injury. DeAndre Swift obviously loses Matt Stafford. Could be some big changes coming in the passing game for him. But if you get Kittle, you also get the little bit of upgrade there in pick.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is it Superflex or is this regular FFPC?
It was stock. And one note I did have from there is the owner that traded away Swift also had a tight end hole, and they were pretty strong at running back. So this is a let me balance out my roster maneuver for that side.
Yeah, I mean, I think from that context, right? When you sort of know the context, it's good because it helps you sort of break ties or think of it. So you're basically, I think roughly they're about the same cost, and you're potentially moving up a tier in rookie picks, and you're basically dealing from a strength to fill a hole, right? That's kind of the way I like to do it. I could see going the other way, but in terms of the context that we have, I think it's a fine deal.
Yeah, and especially balancing out your roster. I mean, DeAndre Swift showed some promise, but again, if he's going to be someone that's sort of on the perimeter potentially, and Kittle goes to auto start status for you with the premium at the position, where you look at tight end and you say, well, how many guys are really moving the needle? You know, is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? It kind of varies based on who's healthy. Kittle comes back healthy. We already talked about potentially a quarterback upgrade for that offense that could really unlock upside for multiple players. And like you said, moving to 105, I mean, that could be a real pivot point where all of a sudden, I mean, Kyle Pitts in premium is going to go in the mid first, of drafts. You could be looking at running back 2, wide receiver 2 or 3. So you have plenty of options that at 8, I mean, deductive reasoning, you're going to have 3 more options on the board than you didn't otherwise. And you'll probably prefer one of those 3 as opposed to taking the same guy you would at 8. So yeah, I think knowing that you're balancing out your team, this is exactly the type of existing league that you drafted Swift. You insulated yourself from year 1. You probably started him a little bit last year, but now you get a cornerstone guy at another position, and it really affects your lineup in a positive way by balancing out. Where it's different than, say, a startup draft situation where maybe you take Swift and it's not much of a discussion, but now balancing it out where Swift is excess. That's really where the power comes in of repositioning yourself as an existing squad.
Yeah, and that moving picks isn't nothing, right?
Exactly.
I mean, for sure.
All right, we've got a Mike Evans special. This is FFPC Superflex. So we've got, and this is similar. So maybe your answer will be the same as the Michael Pittman one from a few minutes ago. But we have Mike Evans for Deebo Samuel, Kenyon Drake, 304, and a second in 2022.
Evans and don't flinch.
Yeah. Deebo Samuel, I'm kind of surprised. Like, this looks like almost a construction from a year ago, right? Where Deebo was before Brandon Ayuk was drafted, before Deebo missed some time, and Kenyon Drake, wasn't an upcoming free agent. There's so much risk with this, is the thing that I would point out here. Yeah. I mean, you're selling it for parts. It's $1 for 4 quarters, and you lose those a lot. So,
yeah. And it's interesting if Evans sort of plays at the pace that he's played at for the next 3 or 4 years, he's got a pretty good Hall of Fame case. Right?
Oh yeah, easily.
So again, we sort of, I think in the context of it happening, right? Like we tend to not contextualize some of these players, and he's one that for some reason people just want to dump all over him, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but
I think it's because he's never finished as like the wide receiver 1, or it seems like he puts up a big year and then he takes a step back by more than 5 or 8 or 10 spots, and then he'll come back up and then he'll come back down. So I think those two aspects of the true, like, for 24 months in a row he's considered the best wide receiver in the NFL. He's never really had that. The teams he's been on haven't been overly great. And I think people like Amari Cooper, I mean, I think they want to downplay the floor, right? I mean, that, yes, you have guys like Terrell Owens or Julio Jones or Randy Moss where they just put up these large spans of time where it's like, oh yeah, they're just top 8, top 10, like all the time. But outside of that, you don't get a lot of guys that put together 3, 4, or 5 year runs. And so if he's like in that next grouping, what's wrong with that? I mean, he's 7 for 7 for top 24 seasons.
You know how many people have done that in their career?
Almost none, right? It's Julio and I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 other guys.
I don't think Julio was inside the line on that.
Really?
I think he missed a season because of it. I think he missed an early part of his career with an injury.
Okay. Maybe
I'll
it was
check.
per. Maybe it was. I go
His
per
third
game. So
year,
maybe that
his
was it.
third
Okay.
year, he busted out. He finished
Okay.
his. I have him like in the 60s.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and I think it was injury if memory serves. I think he broke his foot. But yeah, I mean, Evans is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's getting way too cute by like, oh, I'm shooting for more upside. Like, no, it's just again, that's just a really solid double, right?
Well, few guys have more. The problem is few guys have a predictable more upside higher than his.
Correct. Yes.
Because he could go for, I mean, obviously we've seen different iterations. Like he had one year, I remember early on, where he had like 12 touchdowns, but you're like, man, the volume was kind of low. And he's a touchdown regression candidate. What happens the next year? Big volume, and he had like 3 touchdowns. So that's sort of, again, he's a higher variance guy because he could lead the league in touchdowns, but he could also go for 1,500 yards. But it's probably just going to be one of those. It's not going to be the perfect storm season. And by this point, the likelihood that he has a career year, and for career year, he'd have to be top 2 or top 3. So again, high personal bar he has. Let's go over one more here, and let's include Mr. David Montgomery in it. So talk about a riser. I mean, we were talking that he could have been like one of the, man, look at this profile. And people didn't react enough. And then what does he do the last month of the fantasy season? He goes off and he was like the number 1 running back. It's like, oh, that killed all of that. That was like ants at a picnic and someone with a boot on their hand, just like going mashing all of the promise from these ants of getting all the tasty treats. But so David Montgomery in FFPC and 303 for Mike Gesicki is tight end premium and 109.
And I'm assuming it is not super flex either.
Right. So we're talking, the stock cut down to 14 positional players and then 18 in season.
Yeah, it just seems like I mean, Gesicki, right, the tight end premium is nice, but I'm not sure how much of a difference maker he is.
Are you a fan? Because, I mean, he was deceptively good last year for the lack of sort of a lot of people talking about how he's one of the better tight ends in Dynasty. He just doesn't have that cachet to him.
Yeah, I mean he's productive, right? In kind of an under the radar type of way. I don't know. He's interesting to watch as a player. He plays football kind of like a deer. I don't know. It's a
baby deer syndrome.
Yeah. His gait is really something. It's so funny to me because we were for a while on the anti-David Montgomery track, and now I feel like we're on the high end of David Montgomery. What do you think you get at 109, like in a start one? What do you think you're expecting there?
Let's see. So look at some of my ranks. I mean, I think you're looking at, you might get a look at running back 3, which could be Javonte Williams. That for sure is going to be someone with not round 1 pedigree, because there might not be any running backs. You'll be able to get a first round wide receiver if you want it. So you're probably looking maybe Rashad Bateman. Does someone else slip in? Is it Jalen Waddle type? Kyle Pitts, I think, is going to go in that. Again, it's tight end premium, so I'm thinking he would go 5 to 8. He'll probably be gone by 9. So that'll be off the table, which I think would be really intriguing at 9 if he somehow were to last there. So, yeah, I mean, it feels like you're kind of throwing away. We've talked about Montgomery's insulation before, right? With a couple more years on his rookie deal and with what he just did, 3-down profile, do you think Tariq Cohen is going to come back and really impede upon what he's doing? Cohen took a step back this year anyway, so before his injury. So it feels like the theme of the night and talking about the trades of you take a double. I mean, Montgomery and giving him up for 9 and Gesicki, if we're both in agreement that Gesicki doesn't really move the needle much, then I think it's the Montgomery side. Yeah,
and I don't know. You sit here and you're like, all right, there's a day 2 running back, just profiles, take the name out of it. Day 2 running back, multiple hits to start his career, and he's 23 years old, right? And he's got 2 more years left on his rookie contract.
Let's trade him for a late first.
Yeah, it just seems like it's bad. Like when you do that, and then you put the name back to it, you're like, oh man, we're too low on the guy, right? Yeah, to me, I think it's got to be the Montgomery side. And
yeah, to me, it would make a difference if this was like 105, 106. Like that actually would change it because now you're bringing in
super flex. Does that change it too for you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
109, and we've talked about this in passing, but I mean 109, if you bring in 3 to 4 quarterbacks, I mean now it's still it's the equivalent of 5 or 6
Right.
in the other format. And what's the default would be 4 quarterbacks are projected to go in the top 10 or 12. I mean, the worst case scenario is like, well, I don't like the other positions. I'll just go, with a top half round 1 quarterback, and so you can just fall back on that, which really helps. So I think we're kind of, circling around this, but it's just a little too low. And yeah, if it were super flex, I mean, I think 8, 9, 10, those picks are fine, to get back from Montgomery. But the fact that you're given 303 as well, I mean, let's not pretend like that's nothing either. So you can use that as a tool to trade up, move around, or you could trade that for positional player. So I just, so you really got to be, and I'm not a Gesicki in the top 10 type person. So he's outside my top 10. And for that, I mean, you're going to be able to find closer options to him. I mean, for example, just to throw one thing out there, I mean, I have OJ Howard right around that same zone, and guess who's going way cheaper in the market? It's Howard. It's not Gesicki. So, or Hayden Hurst or Eric Ebron, guys like that, where it's like, why would I pay for Gesicki when I have these other pivots that are far cheaper? So I definitely wouldn't go out of my way. Like, give me someone other than Gesicki, in this trade, and I might go 109 is what I would say. So
sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. All right. Let's get a few rapid fire reactions from Jordan here for quotes from the Dynasty Trades Forum this week on the Footballguys Shark Pool. So here we go. I consider Keyshawn Vaughn a throw-in.
I like it as a buyer.
Yeah, exactly. I don't day 2 running back going into year 2 doesn't sound like a throw-in to me. And this is referencing Amari Cooper. And what's hilarious is you actually said almost this exact comment about the whole shooting for ceiling and type stuff. But this pivots. He says, I just hate owning him. He puts up so many duds. The issue with Cooper is expectations and a decent amount of very disappointing fantasy playoff games.
Yeah, so there's no proof. The biggest myth in all of Dynasty is that consistency in player scoring matters. It's absolute bogus. There's no proof to it. And anyone that sort of pitches you on that is wrong. And there's a really good data case to be made for that. I've made it in multiple different forums. It's just not true. There's no link to how the variance of a player. So what happens is players get the definition of being boom bust. I mean, that's part of the Mike Evans thing. And honestly, when you look at player production, if you just Chad is 8 games of top 24 seasonal of top 24 weekly production. Is that good or bad?
That's good.
Yeah, because you know what happens? That basically locks you in for a top 15 finish. 8. That's half of the games finishing in the top 24. Historically, that's I think the odds of it are like north of 90% on finishing in the top 24, and it's really, really high. I mean, it's been like 6 years since someone has done that and not finished in the top, not finished in the top 24 of the position, right? And typically they're top 15 finishes. There's not a lot of those finishes that go around. So again, the boom bust thing with any of these guys, with Mike Evans, with Amari Cooper, when those things start, it's a clear indication of it's a buying opportunity, because it has absolutely zero value to your dynasty team. So,
well, and talk about life in the small sample size, right? When you say very disappointing fantasy playoff games, we're talking about what, 1, 2, 3 games at most in one season. Even if you do that for 2, 3, 4 seasons in a row, you're still talking about a fraction of one season in sample size. So just keep that in mind about, if you hold grudges or say, that's it, this guy cost me a fantasy title in 2019 or 2020, and I'm done with him. I mean, come on. It's a 1 game sample, or it's a 2 game sample, and it's a team game. I mean, and that's why I thought it was funny. You got these big performances of 40, 50 points in the fantasy playoffs, and some of those teams lost. To consider them the runaway freight train, it's like, well, why don't you just concede as the other team? Well, that's because it's not over. And the whole, like you were saying, let's keep, your lineup is not built upon singles and doubles. Like every player doesn't hit their points per game. And it's really the 30+ point games, the 40+ point games that move the needle. And it's, you can absorb single digits. And I know people look at that like, oh, this guy cost me. Well, you might have been just a play away with another long touchdown that was almost completed with one of your top guys putting up 25 as opposed to 35. No, that was the difference. It wasn't the guy, that got bracketed all game and only got 4 targets and went 2 for 20. That wasn't really the reason you lost. It was it's a total aggregate points. And what moves the needle are the big games and big plays mostly.
Yeah, 4 for 121 in the championship this year.
Yep.
Right.
No, I don't like that. I don't like that, Jordan. He didn't go for 202 touchdowns.
Right.
Without Dak Prescott. I don't like that. No, I don't like that at all.
6 for 83 and a touchdown in week 14 last year, right?
He didn't help me. He didn't help me, in the first 6 weeks, at all. Right. So that's he didn't get me out to a 4-1 start for my team. All right.
Yeah, week 14 in 2018, 10 for 217 and 3 touchdowns.
You really lit something up for Jordan because he is like, now this is his mission. This is his mission. He's going to go through all of it and be like, if you count just the fantasy playoffs, Amari Cooper has been wide receiver 19 over the course of
championship game in 2017, 3 for 66 and a touchdown. Right? Narratives are most of the time sold to you by charlatans. So.
All right, last one. I thought this was applicable because it was Buffalo Bill centric here, and this refers to Dawson Knox. Dawson's just a guy. Is that true or false? What do you think?
True. It's true. Okay.
So the breakout for Dawson Knox is not coming.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So that'll do it. We talked a lot in this episode about Jarvis Landry. We also talked about dynasty trades. We talked about Brandon Ayuk a little bit. Good and bad process of dynasty trades. We also, at the end, got a little feathers being ruffled by Jordan McNamara. And it wasn't with Keyshawn Vaughn. It was about Amari Cooper. And his quick bullet points turned into a very worthwhile diatribe and rant. I think we should call that a rant. I actually felt your blood pressure rise from the typical, 109 over 42. Got you all the way up to 118 over 69. So very good. That's tough to do. That's tough to do. Exactly. It was a goose for a bug. All right. So I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.